The past does not stay in the past. Not entirely. It travels with us, not always visibly, not always in forms we recognize, but present. In the way we respond to certain rooms, certain voices, certain silences. In the specific things that make us feel safe or unsafe, seen or unseen. In the particular longings that follow us through decades of otherwise ordinary life. The past is always, in some form, here. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen in Los Angeles in 1926. The childhood that followed was one of extraordinary instability. Her mother was mentally ill and largely unable to care for her. Her father was absent. She spent years moving between foster homes, 12 of them by some accounts, with a particular quality of impermanence that comes from never quite knowing how long you will stay or what is waiting when you move. She was not abused in all of them, but she was, in nearly all of them, a temporary resident in someone else's life. Never quite home, never quite certain of belonging. She spoke about this in ways that were sometimes direct and sometimes oblique, across a career that put her at the center of more attention than almost any person of her era. The attention was real. The adoration was genuine. And none of it, she said, quite reached the place where the childhood had left its wound. Because the wound was not about whether strangers thought she was beautiful or talented or worth watching. It was about something more primary than that. The question of whether she was simply wanted. Whether she was someone whose presence mattered to the specific people whose presence mattered to her. Whether she belonged, not in the abstract world of fame, but in the specific, personal, irreplaceable sense that a child needs to belong. She spent much of her adult life looking for the answer to that question in places that could not fully provide it. In marriages that began with real love and ended in distance. In relationships with men who were drawn to the Marilyn Monroe image and who sometimes struggled with the Norma Jean underneath it. In the work itself, which she was serious about and skilled at more than most people recognized, which could provide a kind of temporary answer, but which always ended and left the question still there. And in therapy, which she pursued seriously across the last years of her life, and which she said was helping her, slowly, imperfectly, with backsliding and difficulty, to begin addressing the original wound. What she found in that therapeutic work was something that surprised her. She had expected that the work would be about changing something, about becoming someone who no longer carried what she had been carrying, about leaving the childhood behind. But what she found instead was something different. She found that the work was not about leaving the child behind. It was about turning toward her, about acknowledging, for the first time with genuine compassion rather than shame, the reality of what that child had experienced, and about finding, in that acknowledgement, something that had never quite been available before, the ability to be kind to herself. That is the healing that had been missing. Not the resolution of the childhood, not the undoing of what was done, just the kindness, the willingness to look at the child who had survived it and say, "What you went through was real, and you deserve more gentleness than you have been giving yourself. Maybe you carry something like that. Maybe there is something in your own past, a childhood difficulty, an early loss, a period of your life when you were treated in ways you didn't deserve, that you have been carrying without quite turning toward, without quite looking at with the kindness that it deserved, and that the person who lived through it needed. Not because you want to dwell in it, not because the past is a place worth living, but because the child who survived it is still in there, somewhere, and they have been waiting a long time for someone to notice what they went through. To say, quietly, with genuine feeling, that was hard, and you did something remarkable by surviving it. And I see you. That kind of turning toward, that willingness to acknowledge the original wound with compassion rather than shame or dismissal, is not the whole of healing. But it is where healing begins. Not in the resolution of the past, in the recognition of it, in the simple, specific, quiet act of being kind to the person who carried it. Marilyn Monroe understood, toward the end of her life, that the glamour and the fame and the attention had been, in part, an attempt to answer a question that they couldn't answer. Not a question about whether she was talented, not a question about whether she deserved to be loved in the abstract, but the specific, childhood-sized question of whether she was wanted by specific people in a specific place, as herself, not the image, not the performance, just the person. She was moving, in the work she was doing in her final years, toward a different kind of answer to that question. An answer that didn't require the confirmation of an audience. An answer that came from inside rather than from outside. The beginning of a self-worth that was not contingent on being seen in a certain way. She was getting there. Slowly. With difficulty. But getting there. Maybe you are getting there too. In your own way, at your own pace, toward your own version of the same destination. The place where the wound from long ago has been acknowledged and turned toward, and finally, slowly, given something gentler than you have previously given it. Not resolved, not forgotten, but held differently, with more kindness, with more compassion for the person who survived it. So take a slow breath and think for a moment about the child you were, the specific one, in the specific circumstances, carrying the specific things. And consider offering them something they may not have received enough of at the time. Just kindness. Just the quiet acknowledgement you survived something real, and you are here. And what you carry from it is not a flaw. It is simply what happened. And you have been remarkable, in ways you may not always see, in managing it for as long as you have. That is enough. You are enough. Marilyn Monroe was working toward that understanding when she died. You don't have to take as long. You can start now, with whatever compassion you can bring. Even a small amount is the beginning. And the beginning is always available. In the next quiet moment, in the next ordinary morning, in the next space between what you are doing and what you are doing next. In those spaces, the old child is still there, still waiting for the turning toward. And the turning toward does not require a therapist or a formal process or complete emotional breakthrough. It only requires the willingness to pause for a moment and look back, not with judgment, but with something quieter and gentler. With recognition, with kindness, with the specific, simple, important acknowledgement, I see you. I know what you went through, and I am glad you are here. Marilyn Monroe left behind more than most people realize. Not just the images, though those have outlasted almost everything, but the candid glimpses of someone working, genuinely and with great seriousness, at understanding herself. The journals, the notes she left with her therapist, the interviews where the actress was briefly set aside and the person underneath spoke. In all of those, there is the same quality, a woman who had not given up on the project of becoming someone at peace with who she was, who was still, at 36, still trying, still moving toward the understanding that had been so difficult to reach. That effort, the ongoing, imperfect, sometimes backsliding effort to understand yourself and be kind to yourself, is available to any of us, at any age, in any circumstances. It doesn't require youth. It doesn't require a clean slate or a resolved past. It requires only the willingness to keep trying, to turn toward the wound again when you have been turned away from it, to offer the kindness again when you have forgotten to say, I see you, still, always. I am still turning toward you. That is what Marilyn Monroe was doing, and it is what you can do too. Not perfectly, not all at once, but in the small moments, in the quiet spaces, in the ordinary minutes of an ordinary day, when the past and the present briefly meet. In those moments, something is possible, something gentle, something long overdue, something that the child you were has been waiting for. Turn toward them and begin. There is one more thing her story offers, something about the difference between the wound and the person who carries it. Because one of the subtle costs of an unexamined wound is that the wound can come to feel like the whole of who you are. Like the difficulty is not something that happened to you, but something that is you. That the instability and the early losses and the specific things that shaped your most difficult responses are not experiences you had, but a definition of what you are. And that conflation between the wound and the self is one of the most damaging things the wound produces. Marilyn Monroe struggled with this. The Norma Jean who had survived a chaotic childhood was not the same as the chaos itself. She was someone who had been shaped by it, yes, but shaped, not defined. The warmth and the humor and the genuine intelligence and the deep capacity for feeling that made her who she was, these were not the wounds. These were the person. And the work she was doing in those final years was slowly separating the two. Learning to say, The difficulty was what happened. This warmth, this aliveness, this specific way of being in the world. This is who I am. That separation between what happened and who you are is one of the most important pieces of healing there is. It does not minimize what happened. It simply refuses to let what happened be the final word on who you became. And you get to refuse that. The wound is not the whole of you. The survival of it is part of you. But so is everything else. Every kind thing you've done, every person you've loved, every morning you got up and continued. That is you. And it is more than the wound. Always.